It's a great thing, I think, for not only us fans to be able to see something like this, but for the people who are maybe the casual viewers of this. This is not just a film about a Bigfoot subject, it's a classic film, a cult classic, whatever you want to call it. It's a classic film that deserves this restoration and it deserves the respect. How many people were at the premiere last night? How many people saw it? And I assume the rest of you have tickets, to see the rest of the showings. You're going to be amazed. I was watching parts of the film, and you could see just from the trailer, there were parts in there that, even though I've seen it like 50, 100 times, I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen this before. What is this part? And that was because it's so clear. You could see details in this I'd never seen before. And I thought, well, is this really going to enhance it, or because it's less shadowy and dark, is it going to make it less spooky? But in fact, it made it better. And the monster scenes hold up. They're shot so effectively that it still works, and it works especially well when you can see it as it's supposed to be. There was parts of it where I was just amazed at the cinematography, the way Charles Pierce shot this thing, especially for a director who had never done a movie before. It was shot so well, and that's one reason it's held up, and one reason for its initial success in the theaters is because even though it's about a subject that, people can believe or disbelieve in, at the core it was a great film. The build-ups, the climaxes, the stories, the way it showed people, the authentic locations, and the way the cinematography was, it was so effective. So that being said, it was a great honor to participate in this and to have some of the cast members with us for the first time. I've been to so many of these events across America, whether they be Bigfoot conferences, cryptozoology conferences, or horror conventions, which I do as well. And there's always the stars and the cast from all these horror films, whether they're obscure ones or whether it's Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger. And I was always like, man, I wish we could get some of the actors from The Legend of Boggy Creek, because it only seemed natural, That's what I saw at these horror conventions, that they had a lot of the actors, yet when we do these, we never did. So it's great now, Keith Crabtree started doing these, and now we got Glenn and Ginger and Kathy and others from the movie here that we can see in person. And, definitely you want to get their autograph and all that, because, this is something that a lot of people don't have a chance to get. And I know a lot of people are going to be jealous when you say, I got Bobby Ford's autograph from the movie. Your buddy in North Dakota is going to be going, whoa, dude, how'd you get that? Well, he was here at this Fouke Monster Festival. So that's all pretty cool. And I'm still ultimately the kid who saw that movie when I was little in the drive-in. And I'm still such a fan of the movie that all this still excites me. I'm never bored with it. I love getting the sighting reports. It's something that, has taken over my life in a way, but that's a good thing, because I still love this film just as much when I saw it back then as I do now. So I want to talk a little bit about, I didn't even make a presentation. I'm just literally going off the cuff here. And I'm going to talk about some of the main things that people keep coming up with their observations and questions about the Fouke Monster phenomenon. I get these questions over and over, whether they be new people or whether these are people who don't know much about it or find out that I research Bigfoot or Legend of Boggy Creek. So the plausibility of something existing down there in the woods is one of the questions. Can there be something down there, a population of something living down there that we haven't proven? How can that be? How can nobody have a picture of that? People always ask, how come nobody's gotten a photo? Well, I was just talking to somebody, it was like last night or the night before, and they were talking about how they were driving down the road and some kind of animal ran across the road and they wanted to get a picture of it. They said, well, I even had my cell phone in my lap. I said, well, that's the thing. People think it's easy to, you got a cell phone, how come you can't get a picture of something you only saw for 1 second? It's not that easy. It's going to come at a time when maybe you're driving, you don't have your app open on your phone. If you're not ready for this picture, the Fouke Monster ain't stopping for a glamour photo. Machete don't text, Fouke Monster don't pose for photos. You just got to think about that. It's not that easy to whip out the phone and get a picture, because most of these sightings are extremely brief and unexpected. And even when there's a longer sighting, when somebody's looking at something, this isn't like seeing a deer. Your heart's beating. You don't know what to do. Is this thing going to run at me? Is it going to attack me? You're not thinking about photos. You're not thinking about taking a selfie with this thing. You may be thinking about running for your life. So the whole excuse about how I don't have a picture, it's not such a major thing as people make it out to be. Now, granted, there are a lot of game cameras in these woods, yes. And there are people with cameras. There's wildlife photographers that can get photos of things that are hard to get. Somebody can go out and get a photo of a wolverine. Wolverines are very reclusive and very hard to get a photo of. Yet people have pictures of wolverines. So it's not impossible. But with the game cameras, there's been a study that was done several years ago, and it has a big old long kooky name. I can't ever remember it. But basically the study was done testing coyotes and their sensitivity to the game cameras in the woods. And it was proven that the alpha male coyotes could sense and would avoid these game cameras. Now the younger coyotes, they didn't seem to pay attention. They would run in front and get their camera taken, get their picture taken by the camera. But the older, wise, wily coyotes were not falling for it. They could either smell it or sense it or hear it or whatever it was that alerted them, and they were shy away and steer clear of it. I'm like, if a coyote has this ability, then certainly something that we would perceive logically to have perhaps more intelligence, something that wanted to be more reclusive, may indeed also avoid these cameras. So if you've got a lot of cameras in the woods, these are alien things. These are things not natural to the woods. They're made of petroleum products. They smell different. They emit sounds and noises and things that can trigger these animals to alert. And so there again, perhaps they are avoiding them. And that's why we don't often get a picture on a game camera. And when we do, there's this big fuzzy blurry white thing. And it's like, could be a bear, could be a Sasquatch, undetermined. So those are some of the arguments that I often hear to try to explain this. People say, well, what is there to eat? There's not enough for these big old things to eat down there. Well, I beg to differ. If anybody's been out in the Sulphur River bottoms down here, there is plenty of wildlife, game, fish, vegetation. There's everything you need to live down there. Herb Jones in the film, he did it. I mean, Travis brought him tobacco and coffee. I mean, you got to have that if you're a human. You got to have coffee at least. I got to have that. But there's enough out there to live. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a sighting right down here, not too far from here, of a bear, a very big bear. If a bear can live around here, why can't a large, upright, undocumented ape-like creature? And it wouldn't take a big population of these. There's endangered species all over. The populations drop in the danger zone of hundreds. So it doesn't take thousands of these. There could be very few, numbering in the hundreds. And they don't have to stay confined just to here. That's the thing. We call it the Fouke Monster. We call it the Boggy Creek Monster. We identify with this area. And then maybe we go down to Caddo Lake. Anybody been to Caddo Lake in Jefferson? A lot of sightings down there. We call that the Caddo creature. But there's no thing like, hey dude, I'm the Boggy Creek Monster. Well, I'm the Caddo Creature. You can't come across here because this is sort of my deal. It's like roping off your territory. This really is all one big contiguous territory, because you can kind of travel south from here towards East Texas, towards Louisiana, and you can keep into the woods and waterways. And so the same creatures being seen here could quite possibly be the same creatures seen in Caddo Lake. Maybe they're on vacation down there. Caddo Lake is beautiful. Maybe they were trying to go down there and get Don Henley's autograph. Don Henley loves Caddo Lake. But it doesn't mean that they have to stay confined to a certain area. They can move back and forth. People ask me, do you think they're nomadic? They gotta roam. I mean, you have wildcats and cougars, and they have a large range in which they roam, depending on the season, depending on the availability of food, depending on the levels of the waters. Big animals like this need to move because they have to survive. They need a lot of calories. Somebody asked earlier, do you think they're carnivores? Well, they certainly have to be opportunistic and eat what they can. They can't be too picky, because you got to think about the amount of calories you need. If you're a big guy and you're out, I mean, just think how much you eat per day. So this would be their full-time job. They're probably not overbuilding stick structures and other things because they're too busy trying to eat. So they would have to eat whatever they could. And if they are carnivores, there's certainly no lack of wild hogs. And I've got stories from hunters that have seen them attack hogs and things like that. And certainly that would actually be a good thing, because there's so many hogs down here now that we need more Fouke monsters to kind of balance the levels here. So, years ago, a dozen years ago, if you came down here, you didn't see that many hog tracks. But now, if you go down here, I mean, there is hog ruts everywhere, which has become really frustrating, because me and my friend Jerry, Tom, we all like to walk those muddy roads down in the Sulphur River Wildlife Area just looking for tracks. But now you just look and everything's overrun by these hogs. So there's thousands of them down there, and plenty to eat, whether you prefer meat or whether you're pescatarian and you prefer fish. There's plenty of that. So there's plenty of things for these creatures to eat. Some of the other things that always come up, and this drives me crazy, because I wrote a book about it, and I tried to address all these questions. Yet when I see a post perhaps about the legend of Boggy Creek, somebody's always got to chime in and say, well, that was just moonshiners. You know what that is. Somebody who hasn't done decades of research, somebody who doesn't know about all the sightings. And of course, they've never read my book, and I can't follow up and answer all of these questions, because it would be my whole day would be trying to set everybody straight. But this is not something that some moonshiner concocted, like, let's create a story to keep people out of the bottoms. Well, how can we do that? What if we dressed up in a suit and we go out, roam around, and we act like we're a monster, and that'll scare everybody out? No, there's no master plan. There's been too many sightings over too many years, too many credible witnesses, just too much to have been orchestrated by a couple of moonshiners. And most of the time what happens is people who have this in their mind is they've been told by someone that was the story, and they just latched onto it. They haven't been to a conference or investigated it or researched it or obviously read my book to understand the full picture. But I've got sightings that occurred, for example, in the 60s by individuals who didn't live here, who were driving by. They didn't know anything about the Fouke monster or the legend. Only later did they learn that they probably saw the Fouke monster. People that were not in on some sort of a conspiracy to purport tales of a monster, things like that. There's always people say, well, that was my cousin. Oh yeah, man, me and my cousin, we used to dress up. Maybe they did, but you and your cousin hadn't been dressing up for 100 years. And I don't care how dumb your cousin is, he ain't dressing up in a Bigfoot suit and walking up under tree stands with hunters in them. I've got plenty of hunters who have seen these things. Some right here over the years in Fouke. Some of the witnesses were sitting on deer stands. And nobody is going to dress up in a suit and walk through those woods, especially during hunting season where they know there's hunters. You would be, well, I say you would be shot, but most of the people wouldn't shoot at these things because it's just too frightening. They're not sure what to do with it. It looks too much like a man. It's upright. Maybe it is a person in a costume. They don't know, so they don't shoot at it. But again, this can't be one person in a suit. There's just too many sightings. It's gone on too long. And even if you dismiss the ones that are perhaps old, that I wasn't able to firsthand interview the person, I've got plenty of modern witnesses who have seen something that I can interview. And plenty of people I've gotten to know over the years. I didn't just interview these people once. I met them, I got their story, but I've gotten to know them over the years, especially some of the families that live here. And one of my top encounters was an incident related to me by a young man named Terry Sutton. And Terry lives down here in Jonesville, which is the small community towards the Sulphur River south of Fouke. And in 1982, Terry was a teenager, and he was down there fishing on his pond on their land. They have a big old piece of land, and they have a private pond down there. And he was fishing down there late one evening, and he had heard something walking in the leaves. This was February, so there was a lot of leaves on the ground. There was pretty clear visibility into the woods. And Terry said, he thought, well, maybe it's the bull. The bull from our neighbors has gotten out and he's tromping around in the woods. I don't know. Because it's a place where nobody would be trespassing or walking around on their land, typically. So he dismissed it. And it's starting to get late evening, and he hadn't had too much luck, so he kind of went around the bend in the little pond and thought, I'll fish here for a couple more minutes, and then I'll give it up. And about the time he gets around there, all of a sudden he heard now what sounded like distinct footprints walking through those leaves. And he looks up, and he said about 60 feet away, he watched this thing walk up over a ridge, onto the top of the ridge, and he could see it from the side view, and he said it was at least 6 feet tall, maybe 7, a bit hunched over, it had long arms, it was covered in hair, and it was just walking up that ridge. It never even looked at Terry, because Terry is sitting on the water, fishing, being very quiet. And he said he watched this thing walk up, and he saw it walk down the other side of this embankment and disappear behind that ridge. In his mind, he's having to grapple with this, because this is 1982, so everybody here is familiar with the legend of Boggy Creek. Most of the locals have said, it's not something I worry about, but it is in the back of your mind if you're out there in the woods, especially as the sun goes down. It's kind of there. You're not scared of it. You don't know whether you even believe in it. And Terry wasn't sure whether he believed or not. He didn't think too much about it. This is his home. This is where he lives. But he said in that moment when he saw that thing, that was what was going through his mind. He's like, my God, that's the Fouke monster. I can't believe I'm seeing that. I can't believe what I'm looking at. And again, this is a place where people aren't walking around. And he was only 60 feet away. He said it wasn't a person in a costume. Whatever this thing was, it was like an animal. A human-like, ape-like animal. And I could see it clearly. And so in his mind, he's frightened. He's amazed. He's trying to make sense of this. And he could hear this thing continue to walk in those leaves after it disappeared over that ridge. He could still hear it. And he said he finally heard it stop. And he said at that point, I was scared, and I just started paddling to the edge of the pond. And he said he got out, got on the edge, and he listened some more. And all of a sudden he heard this thing take off running. And he said, at that point, I just ran for the house. And when he got up to the house, his dad was just driving in for the evening, and Terry's frantic. He's practically in tears, and his son got out and says, what happened? What happened? And Terry said, Dad, I think I saw the Fouke Monster. I saw that thing down by the pond. And his dad responded very well. He said, well, Terry, let's go down there and look. And Terry was very fearful, but his dad pulled out a .45 and said, you carry this, I'll carry the light. We got to go down there and look. So they did, and they looked around, and they said when they got down there, they could smell this musky, terrible odor still hanging in the air. They looked around, and by now the sun's down, and it's getting pretty dark, and they're looking with flashlights. They never saw the thing. But at least you had his father to vouch for the emotions that Terry had. And so when I was able to interview Terry after coming up here, and many people said, you've got to interview, if anybody's ever had a sighting that we believe, Terry Sutton's your guy. You've got to interview him. So he was reluctant, but I got to know his father, and then finally Terry said, you know, I'll share that with you. I'm not looking for fame or glory or not running to the newspapers. And so I took the report, talked to him at length on the phone, and later on we met in person. And over the years, I've gotten to know Terry's family, gotten to know Terry, which is a good thing because now I can, you know, he's not coming back next week. Oh, wait, I got another Bigfoot sighting. Let me tell you. Just the one. That's it. He saw what he saw, and he stands behind it. And his family can vouch for him, and all the people here. He doesn't live here anymore, but to me, that was one that I can't explain. If you throw away all the rest of them, I can't tell you what that guy saw. I can tell you he saw something. He saw something he couldn't explain. He saw something that fit the very description of this creature that inspired the movie, the one that inspired us to be here today. And those are the kind of reports that you just simply can never get out of your mind. Some are more credible than others. Some I can get to know the family and know the credibility of the person. Sometimes I only meet the person once. But in this case, it stands as my number one because of the circumstances, the place where it happened, the description, and the credibility of this individual. And those are things that your average person who's in the cubicle next to you at work or on the work site doesn't have access to. They may, a Bigfoot conference, you believe in that? Well, if they went down there and talked to Terry Sutton and went on the site and looked at what he saw and got to know Terry Sutton over the years, I promise you they would go, I don't know, but that guy saw something, and it sounded like Bigfoot to me. That's the perspective you get when you come and you look into this research and you watch the movies and documentaries, read the books. You have another perspective on this. We may not be able to answer the ultimate question as to what it is. What is Bigfoot? What is the Fouke Monster? But you can say that there's something to it. It's not something we can simply dismiss. People can't get on Facebook and discount all this stuff by saying, my daddy said it was my cousin, or it was moonshiners. Or there's other rumors that the whole town was trying to keep certain individuals out so they concocted the monster. All kinds of crazy stuff that I've heard over the years. But none of those hold water. And ultimately, we can't explain what it is that we've seen. A lot of people always ask, are there still sightings? That's what they want to know. Because if there has been something living down here then, and has avoided detection, has avoided discovery, certainly it should still be here, right? And certainly there are sightings. The casual Legend of Boggy Creek fan, a lot of the ones that I meet at horror conventions, they love the movie. They're like, and they go, has anybody seen that thing again since the 1970s? I'm like, How much time you got, dude? That's a whole story unto itself right there. Yes, people see it. I think Mayor Terry started off this morning by telling you about the sighting that occurred recently, the women down on 71. Well, that's a very recent sighting. There's always a sighting that comes up. There's rumors of ones, and then there's the ones where I can interview people, and I believe they're solid individuals, and they continue to occur. And the thing is there's probably more sightings, because for every one person that comes forward who's willing to tell his story, there's probably 10 others who saw something. They don't want to say anything. They're not running to the Texarkana Gazette and, hey, I saw something, or calling the Lyle Blackburn hotline. I'm still working on that hotline, by the way. 1-800-Blackburn. You know, the one. If you've seen a Bigfoot, press 1. If you've seen a Chupacabra, press 2. That line goes to Ken. If you see the Loch Ness Monster, press 3. If you don't know what it was, press 9. But these people, there's people that are seeing these things that aren't reporting them. So we have a lot of examples of sightings, but there's probably some people down here. If I hung around here long enough, I could get more. They're reluctant to tell people because they don't want to be laughed at. It's a little more acceptable now to say you've seen one of these creatures because everybody's watched a lot of the shows. For the last decade, there's been a ton of shows on TV about these subjects, finding Bigfoot. I've been on a few of them. Ken's been on a whole bunch of them. Nick's been on some. So these are coming up, and people recognize this, but even then, some people are reluctant to tell what they saw. They don't want to be made fun of. And it's usually those reports that I like to hear. The person who doesn't believe in Bigfoot. Not the person who went out looking for Bigfoot, and lo and behold, they saw it. The person who doesn't even believe in this. The lady I interviewed several years ago, in clear daylight at 10:30 a.m. just north of the Sulphur River, she was driving. She had to turn around, and as soon as she did, there was something standing in the road. It was covered in hair, standing on 2 legs. She said at first she thought, it's a kid in a costume. But as it stood there, she looked at it, and it just stood there looking at her. She said, that's not a person in a costume. It's some kind of an animal. And it scared this woman. She said the thing just, within a few seconds, just turned and darted back into those woods and disappeared. So fast. I was able to interview her. Luckily, this was a circumstance where I would have never heard of this sighting. But she happened to stop at a convenience store. Once you get out of those woods on that county road, there's one convenience store, and I knew the owner. And the lady was so shook up when she was going to buy a Coca-Cola that he's like, what's the matter, ma'am? She's like, I just saw something down there. And she told him. And so I luckily, just pure circumstance, got to interview that woman. And I can tell you, she was emotionally disturbed by what she saw. She's like, I still can't believe I saw that. But she also described it as only standing about 5 feet tall. And she said, aren't these things supposed to be bigger? Which I found to be very credible. Because if you're going to make up a Bigfoot story, you're usually not going to be emotionally disturbed, and you're also going to say it was, oh, this thing was 8 feet tall. It was huge. I said, well, ma'am, they're like anything. If they're not born 8 feet tall, they grow up. So what you saw was probably a juvenile, and probably why you saw it in the middle of the road during the day. It made a mistake. No, well, that makes sense. She doesn't know anything about this subject. She never thought that this is a real creature. They're born as babies, and they grow up. So she was very credible, and one of those that I felt had a solid sighting because, again, she's not out looking for Bigfoot, and she did not want to see this thing. She was disturbed by it. I reassured her that there's a lot of people that have seen things like this, and we're not all crazy, I promise you. And she felt better about that. But those, again, are the things that keep me fired up to interview the next person, because that might be the person that has the next most credible sighting that I've heard, the next sighting that I continue to add to my log of sightings for Boggy Creek. I mean, I document sightings everywhere, but this is my main thing. I always find it a silly question when I'm on a podcast and they go, so what's your favorite monster of all? Or your favorite cryptid? Boggy Creek monster? You know, that's my thing. That's my number one. Because it's close to home, and the one that captured my imagination so many years ago when I saw the legend of Boggy Creek. And I know for a lot of you, it's the same thing. This movie has been with you your whole life. And some of the young people, we've showed it to them, and they love the movie too. Or it's been on Animal Planet on Finding Bigfoot and appealed to a whole new generation. This movie just keeps on going, keeps on going. And that's why it's great to celebrate this thing. I mean, it's associated with Fouke. We might as well embrace this thing. We've got a mayor who's behind it. We got Pam, who's working hard to restore this movie so that we can see it in its full glory. Probably, I can remember seeing it when I was a kid, but I can't remember whether it was clear or the cinematography was good or anything. So in my whole life, I've never been able to watch this movie properly as an adult and appreciate what was done and how it was done. So this is just a really great weekend for this, with the screenings and having you guys come here. And I know this is a small facility, but where we have to start. There's not a lot of options. There's no convention center in Fouke. This is what we have. So by coming here and representing and filling this room up, next year we can see what we can do to make it bigger. You can bring your friends, the guy in the cubicle next to you that laughs at Bigfoot. And we can expand this thing. So it's really great to have you here to support this. And ultimately, this is not about any of us at this point. We've transcended this benefiting any one person or anything like that. It's a legend that transcends everything. When you type Fouke into Google, you're going to get the Fouke Monster. You can never separate it. This is a legend that's taken a foothold here in the 70s and never let go. You can't plan for those things. You can't come up with these things. It's something that is just simply going to happen. Other small towns have their little legends, some bigger than others. I wrote the book about the Bishopville Lizard Man. It's well known, and if you type Bishopville, South Carolina into Google, it comes up with a bunch of Lizard Man hits, which, trust me, the city council doesn't like. But none of them are as big as the legend of Boggy Creek. This is the big one. This is the biggest legend of all when it comes to cryptids, when it comes to Bigfoot in the South. This is the one. It's the case that has the most to it. Somebody asked me, why is this one better than some of the others? I said, because there's a much longer history. There's a lot of credible sightings. It's just a cool town, a cool name. And there was a movie made that made this far more famous than any other cryptid outside of the Bluff Creek Bigfoot could ever be. You pretty much have Patty, that Patterson and Gimlin filmed, and you have the Fouke Monster, the two most iconic Bigfoot things ever. And we're sitting right here in the midst of one of them, this great legend. So it's something that belongs to all of us in many ways. It belongs to this town. It belongs to anybody who wants to still believe that there's some mystery in this world. And what we're doing here, we're trying to benefit Fouke by giving the proceeds to their school district for young people in their education. And people can dismiss Bigfoot and laugh at it all they want or whatever. But it has a purpose here to benefit the community, to benefit the place where it all started. And I feel good about being a part of that, and it's a surreal thing to be in the middle of it. Last night at the screening, after the screening, we had quite a few of the actors from the film up there, and I was able to moderate a panel, and I just look over and go, how did I even get here? I would have never dreamed this up, but I just became part of it, part of the legend, as now all of you are. So I'll leave you with that. There's still sightings. The legend is bigger than ever. Next year it'll be bigger than this year. And there's always something new to it. There's always some mystery to this, and we got to celebrate this mystery of life that we're involved in. So be sure again to go visit the cast members from Legend of Boggy Creek and all the other individuals here that have made this thing cool. And I guess there's only really one more thing to say that that's close to my heart, and I believe I've gotten to know the people of Fouke over the years, and these are some very good people. It's a small town, and once you get to know some people here, they're so invited. They're inviting, they're hospitable, they're just some great people. And ultimately, Fouke is a really nice place until the sun goes down. Thank you.